When my husband of 40 years took his final breath, I thought nothing could hurt more than that moment. I was wrong. 3 days later, my daughter-in-law stood over me, her voice sharp as a blade. "Don't be dramatic, Eleanor. Pack your bags and learn to survive on your own." My son, my only child, stood silently behind her, eyes fixed on the floor, not a word in my defense. That betrayal cut deeper than death ever could. If you've ever had family turn on you when you needed them most, subscribe and leave a comment. Your story matters, and trust me, what happens next in mine will make your blood boil. I remember the funeral like it was yesterday, though it's been nearly 6 months now. Robert looked peaceful in his casket, his hands folded over the navy suit he'd worn to our anniversary dinner just last year. 40 years we'd spent building our life together. Our beautiful Victorian home, the antique shop downtown that had supported us all these years, the gardens I'd tended while he restored old furniture in the garage. Everything we had, we'd built together. The church was packed with faces, some I recognized, others I didn't. Robert had always been more social than me, always making friends with customers, with neighbors, with anyone who crossed his path. I sat in the front pew, my black dress feeling too tight around my neck, my son Michael beside me, his wife Vanessa on his other side. She kept checking her watch throughout the service. Later, I would understand why. After the burial, everyone gathered at our house, my house now, I supposed. The rooms filled with quiet conversation and the smell of casseroles people had brought. I moved through it all like a ghost, accepting condolences with nods and whispers of thank you. What else could I say? No words could fill the hole Robert had left. I found myself in our bedroom, my bedroom now, staring at his side of the closet. His shirts hung there, still smelling faintly of his cologne. I touched the sleeve of his favorite flannel, the one with the elbow patches I'd sewn on 3 winters ago. "Mom," Michael's voice came from the doorway. He was 42 now, with Robert's height and my dark hair, when had gray started threading at his temples. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made me straighten my back. "Of course, dear." He didn't sit. Neither did I. "Vanessa and I have been thinking about the future." "I'm sure we all have." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "The thing is," he looked everywhere, but at me. "The house is too big for just you now. And we've always loved it here." I blinked, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "This is my home, Michael." "It was Dad's home too," he said, as if that explained everything. "And he would want us to be practical. Vanessa and I could move in, help with the upkeep. You could take the guest room downstairs." The guest room. In my own home. The room barely bigger than a closet, with the window that never quite closed right in winter. "I don't think," I began, but Vanessa appeared beside him then, her slim figure framed in the doorway, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. "Eleanor," she said, never Mom or even Mrs. Caldwell. Just Eleanor, like we were distant acquaintances. "We're only thinking of you. This place has so many stairs, so much to maintain. At your age, it's just not practical." My age. I was 68, not ancient. I'd climbed these stairs every day for 30 years. "And the shop," Michael added. "Dad left detailed instructions with me about running it. You won't have to worry about a thing." I felt like I was standing on shifting sand. "Robert left instructions with you? About the shop?" He nodded, a bit too quickly. "He knew you wouldn't want the stress of managing it alone. Robert and I had run that shop together since before Michael was born. I knew every item, every vendor, every regular customer by name. Even when Robert's arthritis had worsened in recent years, I'd been the one handling most of the day-to-day operations. I'm perfectly capable." I started, but Vanessa cut me off with a wave of her hand. "We've already spoken to a financial advisor," she said. "Given the circumstances, it makes the most sense for us to assume control of the assets and provide you with a monthly allowance." Allowance? The word hung in the air like an insult. In my own home, discussing my own livelihood, they were treating me like a child. "I think," I said carefully, "that we should wait until we speak with Robert's lawyer before making any decisions." Something flickered across Vanessa's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or was it concern? "There's no need to involve lawyers and drag things out, Eleanor. We're family. But the look in her eyes said something else entirely. Something cold and calculating that made my skin prickle. Nevertheless, I said, finding strength I didn't know I had, I'd like to wait. Michael sighed, that same exasperated sound he'd made as a teenager when I'd asked him to clean his room. Mom, we're trying to help you. Dad would want. Your father, I interrupted, would want me to be careful. And that's exactly what I intend to be. The conversation ended there, but the tension remained. Throughout the evening, I caught them whispering in corners, Vanessa's eyes following me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. By the time the last guest left, I was exhausted, from grief, from confusion, from the strange new reality where my son and his wife seemed to be plotting something I couldn't quite understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Robert's absence beside me like a physical pain. What had he told Michael about the shop? About our finances? Robert had always handled the paperwork, the taxes, the banking, not because I couldn't, but because he'd enjoyed it, taking pride in managing our modest but comfortable life. Had he really left instructions with Michael and not mentioned it to me? It didn't sound like the man I'd known for 4 decades, the man who'd consulted me on everything from what color to paint the kitchen to whether we should switch insurance providers. Morning came with no answers, only the dull ache of loss and confusion. I made coffee, too much, out of habit, and sat at the kitchen table, trying to gather my thoughts. We had an appointment with Robert's lawyer in 3 days. Until then, I needed to hold my ground. But holding my ground proved harder than I expected. That afternoon, I came downstairs to find Vanessa in my kitchen, measuring the countertops with a tape measure, making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "What are you doing?" I asked, startling her. She recovered quickly, snapping the notebook shut. "Just getting some ideas. This kitchen is so outdated, Eleanor. Granite countertops would add so much value." "Value to what?" "This is my home, not a real estate listing." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. I'm just thinking ahead. Planning never hurts." I felt a chill run through me. She was already redecorating, already claiming this space as her own. And where was Michael? Why wasn't he here, moderating his wife's presumptions? The next morning, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Creeping down in my robe, I paused on the landing when I heard my name. "Eleanor's being stubborn," Vanessa was saying. "We need to move faster." "The lawyer appointment is tomorrow," Michael replied, his voice low. "After that, it'll be settled." "And if it's not? If your father left everything to her?" A pause. "He wouldn't do that. Not without telling me." "Are you sure?" "Because we've spent a lot already, Michael. The new car, the vacation, the down payment on the lake house." My heart raced. What new car? What lake house? Robert and I didn't own a lake house. "It'll be fine," Michael assured her. "Dad always said the shop would be mine someday. I'm sure he made it official." I retreated upstairs, my mind spinning. They'd been spending money, our money, as if they already owned everything. As if Robert's death had been nothing more than a transfer of assets from one generation to the next, with me as an inconvenient afterthought. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time in my life. Something wasn't right, and fear had replaced grief as my primary emotion. The next morning, the day of our appointment with the lawyer, I came downstairs to find my house transformed. Boxes stood in the entryway, and men in moving uniforms were carrying my furniture, out the front door. "What's happening?" I demanded, my voice breaking. Vanessa appeared from the living room, clipboard in hand. "Oh, Eleanor, you're up early. We didn't want to wake you. What are you doing with my things?" She exchanged a glance with Michael, who had emerged from the kitchen. "We thought it would be easier this way," he said. "Getting the transition started before the appointment." "What transition?" "Stop this right now." I moved to block the movers, who looked uncertainly between me and my son. "Mom," Michael said, his voice taking on that tone people use with difficult children or confused elderly. "We discussed this. The house is too big for you. We're moving you to Sunny Pines." "Sunny Pines?" I repeated, incredulous. The retirement home? Assisted living community, Vanessa corrected with a tight smile. It's very nice. We've already secured you a room, a studio apartment, actually. Very cozy. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I'm not going to Sunny Pines. I'm staying in my home. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mom, be reasonable. After today, all this will legally be ours anyway. We're just getting a head start. You don't know that, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. And until we hear what Robertsville says, nothing leaves this house. I turned to the movers. Please put everything back where you found it. This is my home, and I did not authorize this move. They hesitated, looking to Michael for direction. We're paying you, Vanessa snapped. Continue loading the truck. One of the movers, an older man with kind eyes, set down the lamp he was holding. Ma'am, he said to me, is this your house? Yes, I said firmly. It is. He nodded, then turned to his colleagues. Put it all back, boys. We don't get involved in family disputes. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. You can't do that. We have a contract. A contract I'm happy to void, the mover said. I've seen this scenario before, and I want no part of it. He handed Michael a card. Call us when you have proper legal authorization or agreement from the homeowner. As they filed out, Vanessa turned on me, her composure cracking. You stubborn old woman. Do you really think you can manage this house? This life? You've been riding on Robert's coattails for years. Her words stung like a slap. Robert and I had been partners in everything. If anything, he'd relied on my organizational skills, my eye for antiques, my ability to charm customers into making purchases. Vanessa, Michael warned, but she was too far gone. No, she needs to hear this. Eleanor, you're being selfish and ridiculous. You're in your late 60s alone, with no skills to speak of. What exactly do you think you're going to do? Run that dusty old shop by yourself? Please. I stood straighter, drawing on a well of strength I didn't know I possessed. That dusty old shop put your husband through college. It paid for your wedding. And yes, I absolutely can run it myself. I've been doing most of the work for years while Robert's health declined. Michael looked surprised at this, and I realized with a pang that he hadn't known. He hadn't visited enough, hadn't paid enough attention to see how his father had been struggling, how I'd shoulder more and more of the burden. The lawyer appointment is in 2 hours, I said calmly. Until then, I want you both out of my house. Mom, Michael began, but I cut him off. Out. Now. Or I'll call the police and report you for attempted theft. Something in my voice, or perhaps the mention of police, finally got through to them. Vanessa grabbed her purse, her face flushed with anger. This isn't over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot. As they left, slamming the door behind them, I sank onto the stairs, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. What had happened to my son? When had he become this person who would try to ship his grieving mother off to a retirement home without even consulting her? And Vanessa, had she always harbored this resentment, this naked ambition to claim what wasn't hers? I gave myself 5 minutes to cry, to feel the full weight of this new betrayal on top of my loss. Then I dried my eyes, went upstairs, and dressed carefully for the lawyer's appointment. Whatever happened next, I would face it with dignity. Mr. Jenkins, Robert's lawyer for the past 20 years, greeted me warmly when I arrived at his office. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Caldwell, my deepest condolences. Robert was a fine man. Thank you, I said, grateful for the simple human decency after the morning's events. Michael and Vanessa arrived moments later, both dressed as if for a business meeting, he in a dark suit I'd never seen before, she in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than a month's profit from the shop. They barely acknowledged me, taking seats across the room. Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat. Now that everyone's here, we can proceed with the reading of Robert Caldwell's last will and testament. He put on his reading glasses and opened a folder. This will was executed 6 months ago, replacing all previous versions. 6 months ago. Around the time Robert's doctor had confirmed his heart was failing faster than expected, he'd been quiet for days afterward, spending long hours in his study. I'd assumed he was processing the news, coming to terms with his mortality. Now I realized he'd been planning, preparing. I'll summarize the main points, Mr. Jenkins continued. First, regarding personal effects, Mr. Caldwell leaves all his personal belongings, clothing, tools, books, and other such items, to his wife, Eleanor Caldwell. Vanessa shifted impatiently in her seat. Personal effects were clearly not what she was interested in. Regarding real estate, Mr. Jenkins went on. The family home at 742 Maple Street, along with all its contents and the surrounding property, is bequeathed to Eleanor Caldwell for her lifetime use. Michael leaned forward. Lifetime use? What does that mean exactly? Mr. Jenkins looked at him over his glasses. It means your mother has the right to live in and use the property for as long as she lives. Upon her death, ownership will transfer as specified later in the will. Vanessa's lips thinned, but she remained silent. Regarding business assets, Mr. Jenkins continued, Caldwell Antiques and its inventory, accounts, and goodwill are left entirely to Eleanor Caldwell. Michael's face darkened. That can't be right. Dad always said the shop would be mine someday. Perhaps he meant after your mother no longer wished to run it, Mr. Jenkins suggested mildly. The will is quite clear on this point. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Robert had known, somehow, he had known that Michael couldn't be trusted with our legacy, at least not yet. Regarding financial assets, Mr. Jenkins went on. All bank accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, and insurance policies are to be transferred to Eleanor Caldwell's ownership. Vanessa's composure finally broke. This is ridiculous. She can't possibly manage all that on her own. Mr. Jenkins regarded her coolly. Mrs. Caldwell has successfully co-managed these assets for decades, Ms. Harris. I see no reason to doubt her capabilities now. I could have hugged him for that simple vote of confidence. Now, regarding inheritance for Michael Caldwell, Mr. Jenkins continued, and the room went very still. Robert has established a trust fund of $50,000 for his son, to be administered by First National Bank. Michael will receive quarterly payments of $2,500 until the fund is depleted. $50,000? Michael exploded, standing up. That's it? After everything I'd done for him? For the business? Mr. Jenkins remained unflappable. There is a condition attached to this bequest. The payments will continue only if Michael demonstrates, in the trustee's judgment, respectful and supportive behavior toward his mother. Any action deemed harmful or disrespectful to Eleanor Caldwell will result in immediate termination of payments and forfeiture of remaining funds. The blood drained from Michael's face. He looked at me, then back at the lawyer. This is insane. My father would never do this to me. I assure you, these were Robert's explicit instructions, Mr. Jenkins said. He was of sound mind when he signed this document, with 2 witnesses present. Vanessa stood up, her hands shaking. We'll contest this. Elder abuse, undue influence, we'll find something. This cannot stand. Mr. Jenkins closed the folder calmly. You're welcome to try, of course. However, Robert anticipated that possibility. There's a no-contest clause in the will. Should you challenge any provision and lose, Michael forfeits even the $50,000 trust fund. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at the lawyer, then at me, his expression a mix of shock, anger, and, was that fear? Vanessa clutched her designer purse, so tightly her knuckles turned white. If there are no questions, Mr. Jenkins said after a moment, I have papers for Mrs. Caldwell to sign to begin the transfer of assets. This isn't over, Vanessa hissed, grabbing Michael's arm. Come on. They stormed out, the door slamming behind them with such force that the framed diplomas on Mr. Jenkins's wall rattled. I sat there, stunned by what had just transpired. Robert had protected me, had somehow foreseen exactly what would happen after he was gone. Mrs. Caldwell? Mr. Jenkins's voice brought me back to the present. Are you all right? I nodded slowly. I'm just surprised. I had no idea Robert had made these arrangements. He smiled gently. Your husband was a wise man. He came to see me right after his diagnosis worsened. He said, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, he said, Jenkins, Michael's a good boy at heart, but that wife of his has $signs for eyes. I need to make sure Eleanor is protected. Tears welled up in my eyes. Even in his final months, Robert had been thinking of me, protecting me. There's one more thing, Mr. Jenkins added, reaching into his desk drawer. Robert left this for you. He asked that I give it to you privately after the reading. He handed me an envelope with my name written on it in Robert's familiar handwriting. I held it carefully, this last message from my husband. Take your time, Mr. Jenkins said kindly. I'll get the paperwork ready, and we can go through it when you're ready. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just learned how I've arranged our affairs. I hope you're not angry with me for keeping these plans from you. I wanted to spare you the burden of knowing how concerned I was about Michael and Vanessa's intentions. I've watched them these past few years, the extravagant spending, the constant hints about the shop, the house. I saw how Vanessa looked at our things, like she was already measuring for new curtains. And I saw how Michael changed around her, becoming someone I hardly recognized. I believe our son still has a good heart, but he's lost his way. The trust fund is my attempt to give him a chance to find himself again, to remember the values we raised him with. Perhaps without the expectation of a windfall, he might rediscover what truly matters. I'm sorry to leave you with this situation. You deserve peace in your grief, not battles with our own child. But I know you, my love. You're stronger than anyone realizes, stronger than even you know. You'll weather this storm, as you've weathered every challenge life has thrown at us. The shop is yours now, truly yours. You've always been the heart of it anyway. Your eye for beauty, your gift with people, that's what made Caldwell Antique special. I was just the lucky man who got to work alongside you every day. I love you, Eleanor. I have since the moment I saw you across that crowded room at Sarah Johnson's party in 1982, and I will love you forever, wherever I am now. All my heart, Robert. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears flowing freely now. For a moment, I felt Robert's presence so strongly it was as if he were sitting beside me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice in my ear. You can do this, Ellie. You're stronger than you know. After composing myself, I signed the necessary papers with Mr. Jenkins, officially becoming the sole owner of everything Robert and I had built together. As I left the lawyer's office, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight, I felt different, lighter somehow, despite the weight of all that had happened. I drove home to my home and parked in the driveway. The house looked just as it always had. The garden Robert had loved now beginning to bloom with early spring flowers. But everything had changed. As I walked to the front door, I noticed something on the porch, a small box. I picked it up cautiously, finding no label or note attached. Inside was a single key, old, ornate, not one I recognized, wrapped in a piece of paper with 2 words scrawled in handwriting I didn't know. Check everything. I frowned, turning the key over in my hand. What did it open? And who had left it? Before I could ponder further, a car screeched to a halt at the curb, Michael's new BMW, the one Vanessa had mentioned, apparently bought with money they didn't yet have. They both got out, Vanessa's face twisted with fury, Michael looking pale and shaken. You knew about this, Vanessa shouted, storming up the walkway. You manipulated Robert when he was sick, got him to change his will. I slipped the key and note into my pocket, standing my ground. I knew nothing about the will until today, Vanessa. Robert made those decisions on his own. Liar, she spat. You think you've won, don't you? The poor widow, all alone with her fortune. This was never about winning, I said quietly. This was about respect. Something you seem to know very little about. Michael stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Mom, be reasonable. We can contest this will. It'll get ugly, public. Do you really want that? Are you threatening me? I asked, surprised at how calm I felt. Your father's will was clear. Contest it and you lose even the trust fund. We don't need your pathetic trust fund. Vanessa sneered. We just need to wait. How many years do you really have left, Eleanor? 5? 10 at most? And then it all comes to us anyway. Her words should have hurt, but instead, they clarified everything. This woman, this stranger my son had married, saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth. And Michael, my only child, stood beside her, not defending his mother, not objecting to her cruelty. You should leave, I said, moving toward my door. Both of you. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. This isn't over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot. We know things about Robert you don't. Secrets he kept from his precious wife. A chill ran through me at her words, at the malice in her eyes. What secrets could Robert possibly have had? Don't contact me again unless you're ready to apologize, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Until then, stay away from my home and my business. I went inside and locked the door, listening to Vanessa's continued threats through the wood, Michael's attempts to calm her, the eventual sound of their car driving away. Only then did I allow myself to sink to the floor, my back against the door, as the events of the day caught up with me. The mysterious key pressed against my thigh, a reminder of the cryptic warning. Check everything. What did it mean? What had Vanessa meant about Robert's secrets? As grief and exhaustion washed over me, one thing became clear. This wasn't over. Whatever Robert had tried to protect me from, whatever game Michael and Vanessa were playing, it was just beginning. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Margaret? It's Eleanor Caldwell. I know it's been a while, but I need your help. Margaret Shen had been my best friend in college, before life and distance had pulled us in different directions. She was a retired detective now, having spent 30 years with the police department. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, the mysterious key, Vanessa's threats, Robert's supposed secrets, it was her. As the phone rang, I clutched the key tighter, wondering what doors it might open and what I might find on the other side. Margaret arrived the next morning, looking much the same as she had 30 years ago, short silver hair instead of black, a few more lines around her eyes, but still with that sharp, assessing gaze that had made her such a good detective. She hugged me tightly on my doorstep. Eleanor Caldwell, she said, stepping back to look at me, still as elegant as ever, even in crisis. I managed a small smile. And you're still a terrible liar, Maggie. She laughed, the sound warming something inside me that had been cold since Robert's death. Well, you look like hell, but considering what you told me on the phone, I'd be worried if you didn't. If you're watching this and know what it's like to reconnect with an old friend during your darkest hour, leave a comment. Sometimes angels appear when we need them most, even sassy, no-nonsense angels like my Margaret. I led her into the kitchen, where I'd already made coffee. We sat at the table, the same oak table where my family had gathered for decades of birthdays, holidays, and ordinary Tuesday dinners, where Michael had done his homework, where Robert and I had planned vacations, where I now sat plotting how to defend myself against my own child. So, Margaret said, wrapping her hands around her mug, start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. I told her everything. Robert's illness, his death, Michael and Vanessa's behavior, the attempted move, the will reading, the mysterious key. Margaret listened without interrupting, her detective's eyes missing nothing. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Show me the key, she finally said. I pulled it from my pocket where I'd kept it since yesterday, as if afraid it might disappear if I let it out of my possession. The key was old, brass, ornate at the head, the kind used for antique furniture rather than doors. Margaret examined it carefully. And the note just said, check everything? No signature, nothing else? I shook my head. Nothing. I have no idea who left it or what it opens. Well, she said, handing it back, seems like someone's trying to help you. Someone who doesn't want to be identified. She took a sip of coffee. What about Vanessa's comment about Robert's secrets? Any idea what she might have been referring to? I'd been turning that over in my mind all night. Robert and I didn't keep secrets. At least, I didn't think we did. Margaret's eyes softened. Ellie, even in the best marriages, people keep small things to themselves. It doesn't mean the relationship wasn't solid. I know that, I said, though the thought still stung. But what could he have hidden that Vanessa would know about? And how would she know it? That's what we need to find out. Margaret set down her mug decisively, starting with a thorough search of this house. If that key opens something here, we need to find it. We spent the morning methodically going through the house, checking every drawer, cabinet, and chest. I felt strange rummaging through Robert's things, as if I were invading his privacy even though he was gone. His study was the hardest, the room most distinctly his, with its leather chair worn in the shape of his body, books arranged in his peculiar system that only he fully understood, the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco despite the fact he'd quit smoking years ago. Nothing fits this key, I said after we'd tried every lock we could find. Maybe it's for something at the shop? Margaret nodded. That's our next stop. But first. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think we should check your financial records. All of them. Bank statements, investment accounts, everything. You think Robert was hiding something financial? The idea seemed absurd. We'd always managed our money together. I don't know what Robert was hiding, if anything, Margaret replied. But Vanessa's comment about secrets, combined with that note telling you to check everything, it suggests someone thinks you need to look closer at your affairs. I sighed, nodding reluctantly. Robert kept most of our financial papers in his study, the filing cabinet in the corner. We spent the next hour going through statements, tax returns, insurance policies. Nothing seemed unusual until Margaret pulled out a folder I didn't recognize. Ellie, she said slowly, have you ever heard of Lakeside Holdings, LLC? I frowned.
No.
What is it? She handed me the folder. Inside were documents establishing a limited liability company in Robert's name, dated 3 years ago. There were bank statements showing regular transfers from our joint account to an account under the LLC's name, $2,000 every month for the past 3 years. I don't understand, I whispered, the papers trembling in my hands. Robert never mentioned this. Margaret's expression was grave. There's more. Look at the address listed for the LLC. I scanned the document until I found it. 1478, Pine Ridge Road, Lake Arrowhead. A lake house, just like Vanessa had mentioned to Michael. He bought property without telling me. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. That's not. Robert wouldn't do that. Margaret squeezed my hand. Let's not jump to conclusions. There could be an innocent explanation. But what explanation could there be for my husband secretly purchasing property, setting up a company I knew nothing about, moving our money into hidden accounts? The room seemed to spin around me, the foundations of my 40-year marriage suddenly unstable beneath my feet. We need to see this property, Margaret said firmly. Today. I nodded numbly, still staring at the papers that represented a side of my husband I'd never known. Lake Arrowhead was about an hour's drive from her home. Margaret insisted on driving, concerned about my state of mind. I sat in the passenger seat, watching familiar landscapes give way to winding mountain roads and glimpses of blue water between the trees. What if? I couldn't bring myself to finish the thought. Margaret glanced at me. What if what, Ellie? What if Robert had another life? Another? I swallowed hard. Another woman? The words hung in the car like a physical presence. Margaret kept her eyes on the road. If that's the case, we'll deal with it. But let's see what we find first. Pine Ridge Road curved along the lakeshore, lined with vacation homes ranging from modest cabins to sprawling estates. Number 1478 turned out to be somewhere in the middle, a charming 2-story cottage with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, set back from the road with a view of the lake. We sat in the car, staring at it. It looks like something out of a magazine, I said softly. The kind of place Robert and I had always talked about for retirement. The kind of place we'd looked at together over the years, but always decided was an unnecessary extravagance. Want me to go first? Margaret asked. I shook my head, reaching for the door handle.
No.
Whatever's in there, I need to face it. We approached the front door, and with shaking hands, I tried the ornate key. It didn't fit. Worth a try, Margaret murmured. Let's see if there's a hidden key somewhere. We searched under flower pots, above the door frame, beneath the welcome mat. Nothing. Maybe around back? I suggested, leading the way around the side of the house. The backyard sloped gently down to a small private dock where a rowboat was tied up, bobbing gently in the water. The sight of it, so peaceful, so perfect, made my chest ache. The back door was locked too, but as we peered through the glass, Margaret suddenly pointed. Look at the bookshelf. Just visible from our vantage point was a built-in bookcase in what appeared to be a living room. And on one of the shelves sat a small wooden box, the kind of antique jewelry box that might require an ornate key. We need to get in there, I said, newfound determination replacing my dread. Whatever secrets this house held, I needed to know them. Margaret scanned the back porch, her eyes landing on a large rock near a flower bed. Oldest trick in the book, she said, lifting it to reveal a spare key. Some things never change, even with secret lake houses. The interior of the cottage was even more charming than the outside. Comfortable furniture, paintings of lake scenes on the walls, a stone fireplace with a mantel holding framed photographs. I moved toward them slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. The first photo knocked the breath from my lungs. Robert and me on our wedding day, laughing as we fed each other cake. The second, Michael's high school graduation. The third, the three of us at the Grand Canyon, squinting in the sun. All familiar photos, copies of ones we had at home. Ellie, Margaret called from across the room. The box. I turned to see her pointing at the wooden box we'd spotted from outside. It sat on the middle shelf of the bookcase, small and unassuming, but suddenly the most important object in the world. With trembling fingers, I inserted the ornate key. It fit perfectly, turning with a satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside was a USB drive and an envelope addressed to me in Robert's handwriting. Open it, Margaret urged gently. I broke the seal and pulled out several pages of Robert's familiar scrawl. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and you've discovered the lake house. I owe you an explanation and an apology. 3 years ago, when I first noticed Michael and Vanessa's unusual interest in our finances, I began to worry. Their questions about the shop, about our savings, about the house, they seemed less like family concern and more like inventory taking. I spoke to Jenkins about it, and he suggested I take steps to protect our assets. This lake house was one of those steps. I purchased it through an LLC to keep it off our personal records, out of our will, separate from everything else we own. I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to burden you with my suspicions about our son. I hoped I was wrong, that I was being paranoid, that age was making me mistrustful. I kept hoping Michael would prove me wrong. But if you're reading this, then I wasn't wrong. Something has happened to make you search for answers, to find this place. The USB drive contains everything you need: financial records, account numbers, passwords. I've set up accounts in your name only, with enough to keep you comfortable for the rest of your life, regardless of what happens with the rest of our estate. This house is yours, Ellie. Your sanctuary if you need it. No one knows about it except Jenkins, who helped me set it up legally, and now you. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. It's the only secret I've ever kept in our marriage, and I did it out of love and fear, love for you, fear for your future. If you're angry with me, I understand. But please know that everything I did to protect you. All my love, always, Robert. P.S. Check the doc. I bought you something you've always wanted. I read the letter twice, tears blurring the words the second time through. Relief washed over me like a physical sensation. Robert hadn't betrayed me, hadn't led a double life. He had been protecting me, in his own way. That crafty old fox, Margaret said, reading over my shoulder. He saw this coming. I nodded, wiping my eyes. He always was better at reading people than I was. I never wanted to believe Michael could change so much. What's on the dock? Margaret asked. His postscript mentioned something. We went back outside, down to the small wooden dock where the rowboat was tied. And there, under a tarp at the far end, was something else, something larger. I pulled back the covering to reveal a gleaming wooden kayak with a red bow tied around it. A sob caught in my throat. For years, I talked about learning to kayak, about gliding across quiet water at sunrise. Robert had always nodded and smiled but claimed it was too expensive, too impractical for people our age. All along, he'd been planning this gift, this place, this escape. He really loved you, Margaret said softly, standing beside me. Yes, I whispered. He did. We spent the afternoon exploring the cottage, finding it fully furnished, stocked with non-perishable food, even equipped with clothes in my size in the master bedroom closet. Robert had thought of everything. The USB drive contained exactly what his letter promised: account information for banks I'd never heard of, passwords, detailed instructions for accessing funds he'd set aside. According to the records, there was nearly $800,000 deposited across various accounts, all in my name only. This changes everything, Margaret said as we sat on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. You have options now. You could move here, start fresh. I shook my head.
No.
That would mean letting them win, letting them take what Robert and I built together. Our home, our shop. Those aren't just possessions, they're our life's work. So, what's your plan? I thought for a moment, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface. First, I need to understand what Michael and Vanessa are really after. They seemed so certain they would inherit everything. Even after the will reading, Vanessa was talking about contesting it, about secrets. You think they know something we don't? Margaret asked. I think they do, I replied. And I need to find out what it is before they use it against me. We drove back to the city as evening fell, my mind racing with new questions. The cottage had answered some mysteries, but created others. Who had left the key on my porch? How did they know about the lake house when Robert had been so careful to keep it secret? And what did Vanessa mean about Robert's secrets? When we pulled into my driveway, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of light visible in the gathering darkness. Stay in the car, Margaret ordered, her former detective instincts kicking in. Call 911. But before I could reach for my phone, a figure emerged from my house. Tall, male, familiar yet not. He moved quickly to a car parked down the street, climbed in, and drove away. Did you see who that was? Margaret asked, already getting out of the car. No, I said, my heart pounding. But it wasn't Michael. We approached the house cautiously. Inside, it was immediately clear someone had been searching for something. Drawers stood open, books had been pulled from shelves, cushions removed from furniture. Police, Margaret said firmly, pulling out her phone. We need to report this. Wait, I said, something catching my eye. On the floor near Robert's study was a business card that hadn't been there this morning. I picked it up. Thomas Reeves, private investigator. Margaret took it from me, frowning. Never heard of him, but it looks like someone's hired a PI to dig through your life, Ellie. Michael and Vanessa. I said, the betrayal cutting fresh. They're looking for something. Something they think will help them contest the will, Margaret agreed. Let's see if they found what they were looking for. We checked Robert's study first. The break-in had been focused here. Every drawer emptied, every book removed from shelves, even the vent covers unscrewed from the walls. What could they possibly be looking for? I wondered aloud, surveying the damage. Margaret was examining the filing cabinet where we'd found the LLC documents earlier. The Lakeside Holdings folder is gone, she said grimly. They know about the lake house now. I sank into Robert's chair, suddenly exhausted. So they know. What difference does it make? The cottage isn't part of the estate. It's already in my name. Maybe they think it proves Robert wasn't of sound mind when he made his will, Margaret suggested. Secret purchases, hidden accounts. They could try to argue he was paranoid, delusional. The thought of them twisting Robert's efforts to protect me into evidence of mental instability made my blood boil. They won't get away with it. No, they won't, Margaret agreed firmly. But we need to be smart about this, Ellie. They've escalated from threats to breaking and entering. Who knows what they'll do next? We called the police, filed a report, had the locks changed. Margaret insisted on staying the night, sleeping in the guest room, the same room Michael and Vanessa had tried to relegate me to just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next morning, over coffee, we plotted our next move. "We need to find out what they know, or think they know," I said. "And we need leverage." "Leverage?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Something to make them back off," I explained. Robert's letter mentioned that he started hiding assets when he noticed their unusual interest in our finances. What if there's more to it than just greed? What if they were already planning something, even before Robert died? Margaret considered this. "It's possible. People don't usually jump straight to kicking out a grieving widow unless there's serious money desperation involved." "Exactly," I said, an idea forming. "And Vanessa mentioned a new car, a down payment on some property. Where did that money come from? They live well beyond Michael's salary as a high school teacher." "You think they've been stealing from you?" I shook my head. "Not exactly. But what if they've been borrowing against an inheritance they expected to receive? Taking out loans, running up debts, using Robert's eventual death as collateral in some way." Margaret's eyes widened. "If that's true, and the inheritance didn't come through as expected, they'd be desperate," I finished. "Maybe desperate enough to break into my house looking for something to use against me." "We need to look into their finances," Margaret said. "But we can't exactly ask them for their bank statements." I thought for a moment. "No, but I know someone who might help us. Robert's banker, Howard Phillips. He and Robert were golf buddies for years." An hour later, we sat in Howard's office at First National Bank. He was a portly man with a kind face and genuine sadness in his eyes when he expressed his condolences. "Robert was one of the good ones," he said, shaking his head. "I miss our Saturday games." "Thank you, Howard," I said. "I miss him every day." After some small talk, I explained our suspicions, carefully, without directly accusing my son of anything illegal. "I'm just concerned about Michael's financial situation. He and Vanessa seem to be spending far beyond their means, and I worry they've gotten themselves into trouble." Howard frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Eleanor, you know I can't discuss other clients' accounts with you, even if one of those clients is your son." "I understand," I said quickly. "I'm not asking for specifics. I just wondered if you've noticed anything concerning." Howard hesitated, looking torn between professional ethics and personal concern. Finally, he sighed. "I can't give you details. But I will say this. If you're worried about Michael's financial decisions, your concern is not misplaced." It wasn't much, but it confirmed my suspicions. On our way out of the bank, Margaret nudged me. "Look who's here." Across the lobby, Vanessa was speaking with another banker, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch fragments. "Need an extension on the payment. The inheritance situation is just delayed. Absolutely good for it." She hadn't seen us yet. We slipped out quickly, returning to my car. "Sounds like they're in financial trouble," Margaret observed as we drove away. "And using the inheritance situation as leverage to buy time," I added. "But what happens when their creditors realize there is no inheritance coming?" "Nothing good," Margaret said grimly. "Desperate people do desperate things, Ellie." Back at home, we tried to restore some order to Robert's study. As I reshelved books, something fell from between the pages of an old atlas, a small key, modern, with a numbered tag attached. "A safe deposit box," Margaret said, examining it. "From First National, the same bank we just left." I stared at it. "I don't have a safe deposit box there." "Robert did," Margaret said softly. Another secret. We returned to the bank, where Howard confirmed that yes, Robert Caldwell had indeed maintained a safe deposit box for over 20 years. With the key and my status as his widow, accessing it was simple. In a private room, I opened the metal box with shaking hands. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a small velvet jewelry box. The envelope contained documents, old, yellowed with age, but perfectly preserved. Adoption papers for Michael. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Robert adopted Michael? But that would mean... "Michael isn't Robert's biological son," Margaret finished, reading over my shoulder. The documents told the story. I had been 2 months pregnant when I met Robert. My previous relationship had ended badly. The father wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. Robert and I fell in love quickly, married before Michael was born, and Robert adopted him legally, raising him as his own from day one. But Michael had never known. We had decided, all those years ago, that there was no reason to tell him. Robert was his father in every way that mattered. The jewelry box contained a gold locket with a small photo inside, a much younger me holding infant Michael, standing beside a man I barely remembered, Michael's biological father. "I don't understand," I said, my thoughts whirling. Why would Robert keep these documents secret, locked away all these years? "Protection," Margaret suggested. "In case the biological father ever came back, tried to claim rights." That made sense, but something still bothered me. But why not tell me he was keeping them here? And what does this have to do with Michael and Vanessa's behavior now? We carefully returned everything to the box, checked it back into the vault, and left the bank, more confused than when we'd arrived. "Let's think this through," Margaret said as we walked to the car. Could Michael have somehow found out about his adoption? Could that be this secret Vanessa was talking about? I shook my head. Even if he did, how would that help them contest the will? If anything, it would weaken their case, since Michael isn't Robert's biological son. Unless... Margaret stopped walking, her expression changing. Unless there's something in those adoption papers we missed. Some condition or clause that impacts inheritance rights. We were so absorbed in our conversation that we didn't notice the car parked across from mine until a man stepped out, blocking our path. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. "Thomas Reeves. I believe you found my card." The private investigator. Up close, he was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with a serious face and watchful eyes. "You broke into my house," I said, anger replacing surprise. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I was hired to find certain documents. Breaking and entering wasn't part of the original assignment, but my client became insistent." "Your client being my son and his wife," I said flatly. Reeves didn't confirm or deny it. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'd like to speak with you privately. There are things you should know." Margaret stepped forward protectively. "Anything you have to say, you can say to both of us." He assessed her quickly, professionally. "Former law enforcement?" "Detective, 30 years, Margaret replied. "Now say what you came to say, or we're calling the cops about that break-in." Reeves nodded. "Fair enough. Not here, though. Too public." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop a few blocks away. Once settled at a corner table, Reeves got straight to the point. "I was hired 3 weeks before Robert Caldwell's death," he said. "Initially to investigate his finances, identify all assets, and determine the most likely inheritance scenario." "Before his death?" I repeated, shocked. "They were planning this before he even died?" Reeves nodded grimly. "Your son and his wife are in significant debt, gambling mostly on her part. They've been borrowing against his expected inheritance for years." "And now that inheritance isn't coming," Margaret said. "Exactly," Reeves confirmed. "They're facing bankruptcy, possibly worse if some of their creditors are who I think they are." My head was spinning. "So they hired you to find something they could use to contest the will?" "Yes," he admitted. "But what I found instead..." He hesitated, seeming genuinely uncomfortable. "What?" I demanded. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "This isn't about the adoption, Mrs. Caldwell. It's about something else entirely." I took the paper with trembling hands. It was a death certificate for a Robert James Caldwell, dated 15 years ago in Arizona. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at Reeves in confusion. "My husband died 3 weeks ago, here in California." "That's what I'm trying to tell you," Reeves said quietly. "The man you were married to for the past 15 years wasn't Robert Caldwell. Robert Caldwell died in Arizona 15 years ago. The man who died in your home 3 weeks ago was someone else entirely." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I would have known." "You're lying." But even as I denied it, small inconsistencies began to surface in my memory. Robert's sudden interest in growing a beard after our move to California 15 years ago, his reluctance to reconnect with old friends, the mysterious trips he'd take alone a few times a year. Who? I managed to ask. Who was he? Reeves slid another document across the table. His real name was Daniel Foster. He was Robert's business partner in Arizona. When Robert died in a car accident, Daniel apparently assumed his identity, moved to California with you, and lived as Robert Caldwell for the next 15 years. I stared at the paper, unable to process what I was hearing. The man I'd loved, lived with, shared my life with for the past 15 years had been a stranger? This is why I came to you directly, Reeves continued. Your son and his wife don't know yet. I told them I needed more time to investigate. But they're getting desperate. Why? Margaret asked, her arm around my shoulders as I sat in shocked silence. Why are you telling us instead of them? They're paying you. Reeves looked uncomfortable again. Because what they're planning goes beyond contesting a will. They're talking about having Mrs. Caldwell declared mentally incompetent, taking power of attorney, liquidating everything. They can't do that, Margaret protested. Eleanor is perfectly competent. They seem to think they can find doctors who'll say otherwise, Reeves said grimly. Like I said, they're desperate. I finally found my voice. And you're telling me this out of the goodness of your heart? He actually smiled slightly at that. Not exactly. I'm a PI, not a criminal. What they're planning crosses lines I won't cross. Besides. He hesitated. Daniel Foster left behind quite a mess in Arizona. Debts, legal troubles. If his true identity comes out, the estate could be tied up in litigation for years, which means no money for anyone. Not you, not them, not their creditors. So, what do you want? Margaret asked bluntly. A finder's fee, he said. 10% of the lake house value. I tell your son and his wife that I couldn't find anything useful. You get to keep your life and your inheritance, I get paid, and everyone walks away. I stared at him, this man who had broken into my home, who was now trying to blackmail me with information that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. I need time to think, I said finally. This is a lot. Reeves nodded, standing up. You have 48 hours, Mrs. Caldwell. After that, I have to report back to my clients. He left his card on the table. Call me when you decide. After he left, Margaret and I sat in stunned silence. Do you believe him? She finally asked. I don't know, I whispered. It sounds insane, but there were always things about Robert that didn't quite add up. Times when he seemed to be remembering someone else's stories, references he'd make, and then quickly change the subject. We need to verify this, Margaret said firmly, before we do anything else. We spent the rest of the day in a haze of online searches and phone calls. Margaret's former police connections helped us access records that confirmed the worst. Robert James Caldwell had indeed died 15 years ago in Arizona. Daniel Foster, his business partner, had disappeared around the same time, his credit cards, bank accounts, and phone all going inactive simultaneously. But why? I kept asking as night fell. Why would he do this? We were happy. At least, I thought we were. We were sitting in my kitchen, no, Daniel's kitchen, surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups. People assume new identities for lots of reasons, Margaret said gently. Maybe he was in trouble, running from something. Or someone, I added, a chill running through me. Reeves mentioned debts, legal troubles. Or maybe, Margaret suggested, he loved you, couldn't bear to lose you, and took an opportunity when it presented itself. I thought about the lake house, the careful provisions he'd made for me, the loving letters he'd left. Whatever his real name had been, the man I'd lived with had loved me. That much seemed genuine. What am I going to do? I asked more to myself than Margaret. If this comes out, everything changes. The will, the shop, the house, none of it legally belonged to Daniel Foster. He had no right to leave it to me. But no one knows except us and Reeves, Margaret pointed out. And he's willing to keep quiet for a price. I shook my head. It's not just about the legalities. It's 15 years of my life, Maggie. 15 years with a man who wasn't who he said he was. How do I reconcile that? Before she could answer, my phone rang. Michael's number flashed on the screen. Should I answer it? I asked, suddenly afraid. Margaret nodded. Put it on speaker. I pressed the button. Hello. Mom. Michael's voice sounded strained, desperate. We need to talk.
Now. I'm tired, Michael.
It's been a long day. This can't wait, he insisted. It's about Dad. About who he really was. My blood ran cold. Reeves had already told them. What are you talking about? I asked, trying to sound confused. Don't play dumb. Vanessa's voice cut in. She was obviously on the call too. We know everything. About Arizona, about Daniel Foster, all of it. If you don't meet us tonight, Michael continued, we're going to the police in the morning. Fraud, identity theft. They'll freeze all the assets, Mom. Everything will be tied up in court for years. What do you want? I asked, though I already knew. Everything, Vanessa said coldly. The house, the shop, the accounts. All of it signed over to us, legally and properly. In exchange, we keep quiet about who Robert Caldwell really was. You're blackmailing me, I said, the word bitter on my tongue. My own son. I'm giving you a chance to avoid a scandal, Michael countered. To keep your dignity, your reputation. Where and when? I asked, my voice hollow. The shop. 1 hour. He hung up. Margaret looked at me, her expression grave. You're not seriously considering this? Of course not, I said, surprising myself with how steady I felt. But I am going to meet them. It could be dangerous, Ellie. They're cornered animals at this point. I stood up, suddenly filled with a clarity I hadn't felt since Daniel, died.
So am I.
And I'm done being the victim in the story. I moved to Robert's study, to the small safe hidden behind a painting, a safe whose combination I'd known all along. Inside was a gun Robert had kept for protection, legally registered, which I'd always been uncomfortable having in the house. Now I was grateful for it. Ellie, Margaret said warily, watching me check that it was loaded. What are you planning? Nothing illegal, I assured her. Just making sure I'm protected. And there's something else in the shop I need to check before they get there. I'm coming with you, she said firmly. No, I replied. I need you to make a few calls first. Then meet me there. I gave her instructions quickly, grabbed my purse and the gun, and headed for the door. Whatever happened next, I was done being pushed around. Daniel Foster might have lived a lie, but he'd loved me truly, enough to protect me even after his death. I wouldn't waste the chance he'd given me. As I drove to the antique shop, the business Robert and I had built together, or perhaps the business Daniel had built while pretending to be Robert, I felt strangely calm. In the span of a week, I'd lost my husband, been betrayed by my son, discovered a secret lake house, and learned that the man I'd loved for 15 years wasn't who he claimed to be. Yet somehow I was still standing, still fighting. The shop was dark when I arrived, the closed sign hanging in the window. I used my key to enter, turning on only the small lamp near the register rather than the overhead lights. The familiar smell of furniture polish and old books wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. I moved directly to the back office, the one space in the shop that had always been exclusively Robert's domain. The key to understanding all of this had to be here. Daniel Foster had maintained this elaborate charade for 15 years. There had to be a reason, documentation, something to explain the inexplicable. The office was small, dominated by an antique roll-top desk that Robert had restored himself during our first year in business. I'd always respected his private space, rarely entering without invitation. Now I pulled open drawers, rifled through files, searched behind pictures on the wall for hidden safes. Nothing seemed unusual until I examined the desk itself. Running my fingers along its underside, I felt a slight irregularity in the wood, a small compartment, invisible unless you were looking for it. I pressed the spot and heard a click. A hidden drawer slid out from beneath the main structure of the desk. Inside was a leather journal and a small package wrapped in cloth. My hands trembled as I opened the journal, recognizing Daniel's, handwriting immediately. August 14th, 2010. Robert is dead. The accident happened so fast, the truck coming around the bend, the broken guardrail, the long drop to the rocks below. I pulled him from the wreckage, but it was too late. No one saw us on that remote stretch of road. I should call the police. That's what a decent man would do. But I'm not a decent man, and we both know it. The cartel's men are closing in. They want their money, and they'll kill me when they find me, if not for the theft, then for what I know about their operation. When I took Robert's wallet from his pocket, intending to find emergency contacts, I saw his driver's license photo. The resemblance is remarkable. We could be brothers. Same height, same build, similar features. With his beard and my clean-shaven face, no one who didn't know us well would spot the difference. A terrible idea is forming. One that might save my life, but at the cost of my soul. God forgive me for what I'm considering. I turned the page with shaking fingers. August 16th, 2010. I've done it. Buried Robert's body deep in the desert, miles from the crash site. Reported myself, Daniel Foster, as the victim instead. The authorities found the burned-out car, assumed the body had been thrown clear and carried off by animals.
Case closed.
I've spent 2 days studying Robert's ID, credit cards, personal effects, learning about his life from the contents of his wallet, his phone. He has a wife, Eleanor, in Phoenix. They own an antique shop together. No children from their marriage, though there's a grown son from her previous relationship. Robert was on his way back from a business trip, buying inventory. He wasn't expected home for 3 more days. Enough time for me to perfect my story, my mannerisms. Enough time to become Robert Caldwell. I sat back in the chair, my mind reeling. The man I'd loved had started as an imposter, a criminal on the run. Yet as I continued reading, the journal revealed a transformation I hadn't expected. September 30th, 2010. I expected Eleanor to see through me immediately. How could a wife not recognize that her husband had been replaced by a stranger? But grief and expectation are powerful filters. She sees what she expects to see. Her husband, injured in a car accident, somewhat changed by trauma, but fundamentally the same man. The guilt is consuming me. Eleanor is kind, intelligent, loving. She deserves better than this deception. Each day I consider confessing, but each day I find myself unable to speak the words that would destroy her world and send me to prison, or worse, into the hands of the cartel. January 15th, 2011. We're moving to California. I suggested it as a fresh start after the accident, and Eleanor agreed more readily than I expected. She said she's always wanted to live near the coast. The real reason, of course, is to put more distance between us and anyone who might recognize that I'm not Robert Caldwell. The irony is that I'm becoming a better man by pretending to be one. Robert was by all accounts a good husband, a skilled craftsman, an honest businessman. Living his life, I find myself transformed by the role I'm playing. And Eleanor, I never expected to fall in love. That wasn't part of the plan. But watching her strength, her grace, her quiet confidence, how could any man, real or imposter, not love her? The entries continued through the years, documenting our life together through Daniel's eyes. His initial fear of discovery gradually gave way to a different kind of anxiety. Fear of losing what we'd built together. Fear of hurting me with the truth. The later entries revealed a man consumed by dual guilts, guilt over his initial deception, and guilt over coming to love the life he'd stolen. March 3rd, 2023. The doctor confirmed what I've suspected for months. Heart failure. 1 year. Maybe 2 if I'm lucky. Eleanor knows something is wrong, though I've tried to minimize it. How strange to realize that my greatest regret isn't the life I ran from, or even the terrible way I began this life with Eleanor, but that I won't have more time with her. I've begun making arrangements. The lake house is secure in her name only. Daniel Foster's creditors and enemies will never find it. I've moved enough money to keep her comfortable. Jenkins has drawn up the will, ironically more legal than it appears since Eleanor is the rightful inheritor of everything we've built together over these 15 years. The only wild card is Michael. There's something in his eyes lately when he looks at me. Suspicion, perhaps, or something darker. Has he discovered something? Does he somehow sense that I'm not the man who raised him? Whatever happens, I must protect Eleanor. She is the one true thing in this false life I've created. The last entry was dated just 3 days before his death. I found Michael in the office today, going through my desk. He left quickly when I entered, making excuses about looking for an old photograph. I'm almost certain he took something, papers, perhaps, or the small box of mementos I kept from my previous life. If he knows, or even suspects, he hasn't confronted me yet. Perhaps he's waiting until after I'm gone to use whatever he's found against Eleanor. The thought fills me with dread. I've written letters, secured assets, done everything I can think of to protect her. But if Michael knows the truth about me, all of it might not be enough. Tomorrow I'll speak to Jenkins about adding additional protections to the will. Time is running short. I closed the journal, my vision blurred with tears. The small cloth package still sat on the desk. I unwrapped it to find a collection of old photographs and IDs, the real Daniel Foster's life, preserved in this hidden drawer. The face looking back at me from the Arizona driver's license was familiar, yet different. Clean-shaven, hair darker, expression harder than the man I'd known as Robert. But the eyes were the same. For 15 years, I'd loved a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. Yet the love itself had been real. Perhaps more real than anything else in our life together. The journal made that clear. Daniel Foster had become Robert Caldwell, in more than just name. The sound of the shop's front door opening snapped me back to the present. I quickly slid the journal and photos back into the hidden drawer, closing it with a soft click. "Mom," Michael's voice called from the main showroom. "Are you here?" I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped out of the office. Michael stood near the front counter, Vanessa beside him. Both looked tense, dressed too formally for a late-night meeting, as if they'd come from seeing a lawyer or banker. "You said you know about Robert," I said without preamble. "About who he really was." Vanessa's lips curved in a cold smile. "Daniel Foster. Wanted in Arizona for embezzlement and suspected ties to drug trafficking. Not exactly the upstanding citizen you thought you were married to. We have proof," Michael added, pulling a folder from inside his jacket. "Reeves found it all. Death certificate for the real Robert Caldwell, Daniel Foster's criminal record, everything." I kept my expression neutral. "And you think this changes things how, exactly?" Michael looked taken aback by my calm. "Mom, everything Daniel, left you in the will is invalid. He wasn't legally Robert Caldwell. He had no right to leave you the house, the shop, any of it. So you're here to blackmail me," I said flatly. "To force me to sign everything over to you, or you'll go public with this information." "We're offering you a way out," Vanessa insisted. "A way to avoid scandal, legal battles, potentially even criminal charges for your involvement." "My involvement?" I repeated, genuinely surprised. "You expect us to believe you didn't know?" Vanessa scoffed. "That you lived with a man for 15 years and never realized he wasn't your husband?" The accusation stung, because a part of me had been asking the same question. Should I have known? Were there signs I missed or chose to ignore? "I didn't know," I said firmly. "But it doesn't change anything." Michael's expression hardened. "It changes everything, Mom. Sign the papers we brought, transfer everything to us, and we'll keep quiet. Refuse, and by this time tomorrow, everyone will know you've been living a lie for 15 years. I studied my son's face, searching for any trace of the boy I'd raised, the child who had once looked at me with love and trust. I saw only a stranger, cold, calculating, desperate. "Why, Michael?" I asked softly. "When did money become more important than family? Than decency?" Something flickered in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or an echo of the person he once was. But Vanessa stepped forward before he could respond. "Spare us the morality lecture," she snapped. "We know about the gambling debts, the loans. You and your fake husband have been hiding money for years while we struggled. Now it's our turn." I shook my head. "Robert, or Daniel, whatever his name was, he loved me.
He protected me."
That's what the lake house was about, what all of it was about. Protection, not deception. "Sign the papers," Michael demanded, ignoring my words. "Tonight."
Now.
Or what? I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. Vanessa pulled out her phone. Or, I call the police right now. I tell them everything. How you and Daniel Foster conspired to steal a dead man's identity. How you've been living on stolen money, hiding assets, evading taxes. You have no proof I knew anything, I pointed out. We don't need proof, Michael said coldly. Just enough to start an investigation. The scandal alone will destroy you, Mom. Is that really what you want? To spend your remaining years fighting legal battles, watching your reputation crumble, possibly even facing jail time. I looked at the folder in his hands, the legal documents they'd prepared to transfer my entire life to them. For a moment, I was tempted to give in, to end this nightmare, to buy peace at any price. Then I thought of the journal in the hidden drawer, of Daniel's transformation from a desperate criminal to a loving husband, of the extraordinary lengths he'd gone to in order to protect me. I thought of the lake house, my sanctuary. I thought of 40 years in business, building something from nothing. No, I said simply. Michael blinked. What? No, I repeated. I won't sign anything. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. You stupid, stubborn old woman. You think this is a negotiation? Sign the papers, or we destroy you. Go ahead, I said, my voice stronger now. Call the police. Tell them everything. But before you do, you should know 2 things. I reached into my purse and pulled out the gun, setting it on the counter between us. Not pointing it at them, just letting them see it. First, I'm not as helpless as you think. Michael stared at the weapon, then at me. Mom, what are you doing? Protecting myself, I said calmly. And second, you're not the only ones who've been busy. I nodded toward the front window. Look outside. They turned to see Margaret getting out of her car, accompanied by a man in a suit. Even from inside, the badge on his belt was visible in the streetlight. That's Detective James Wilson. I informed them. Margaret's former partner. She called him after your little phone ultimatum. He's very interested in hearing about blackmail, breaking and entering, and financial fraud. The color drained from Michael's face. You're bluffing. Am I? I moved toward the door. Let's invite them in and find out. Vanessa grabbed my arm. Wait. Just wait. We can work something out. Let go of me, I said quietly. To my surprise, she did, stepping back with a nervous glance at the gun still lying on the counter. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice firm. You're going to give me that folder with all your evidence. You're going to tell Reeves his services are no longer required. And you're going to leave me alone, my house, my shop, my life. In return, I won't press charges for the break-in or the blackmail attempt. And if we refuse? Michael asked, though his bravado was clearly failing. Then Detective Wilson comes in, and we all have a very uncomfortable conversation about everything that's happened since Robert died. About the threats, the attempted forced move, the break-in at my house. About the gambling debts Reeves mentioned, and whatever other financial irregularities might come to light under investigation. I watched the calculation in their eyes, the desperate search for leverage they no longer had. You're going to have to leave town anyway, I pointed out more gently. Your creditors won't stop coming just because your blackmail scheme failed. Start fresh somewhere else. I'll even help financially, not because you deserve it, but because you're still my son, Michael, however lost you've become. Something broke in Michael's expression then, the hard mask of greed and desperation crumbling to reveal fear, shame, and beneath it all, a glimmer of the boy I'd raised. Vanessa, he said quietly, give her the folder. Are you insane? She hissed. After everything we've done to get this far? It's over, he said, not looking at her. We've lost. The stark simplicity of his statement seemed to finally penetrate Vanessa's armor. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her as suddenly as it had appeared. Fine, she spat, snatching the folder from his hands and tossing it onto the counter.
Take it.
Destroy yourselves with the truth. I picked up the folder, tucking it into my purse along with the gun. You should go now. Detective Wilson doesn't need to come in unless you make it necessary. They moved toward the door like sleepwalkers, defeated and disoriented. At the threshold, Michael paused, turning back to me. "Did you ever love him?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "After you knew? Did you love the man who wasn't really my father?" The question caught me off guard. "I didn't know until today," I said honestly. "But yes, I loved him. He was a good man, Michael, despite how he started. He loved us both." Something like grief flickered across my son's face. Then he nodded once and followed Vanessa out into the night. I watched through the window as they spoke briefly with Margaret and Detective Wilson, then got into their car and drove away. Margaret and Wilson came inside, concern evident on both their faces. "Are you all right?" Margaret asked, embracing me. When I saw them leaving, I was worried. "I'm fine," I assured her, surprised to find it was mostly true. Better than I expected, actually. Wilson, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, looked around the shop with professional interest. Margaret filled me in on the situation. "Quite a story. Are you sure you don't want to press charges?" I shook my head. "They're desperate, not evil. And despite everything, he's still my son." Wilson nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, if you change your mind, or if they come back, call me directly." He handed me his card. Any friend of Margaret's is a friend of mine. After he left, Margaret and I locked up the shop and returned to my car. "What now?" she asked as we sat in the parking lot, the events of the night settling around us like dust after an explosion. I thought of the journal hidden in Robert's, Daniel's, desk, of the lake house waiting for me, of the life I'd built that had turned out to be both more and less than I'd believed. "Now," I said slowly, "I decide who I want to be in this new reality. Eleanor Caldwell, widow of Robert? Or Eleanor Caldwell, widow of Daniel Foster? Or maybe just Eleanor Caldwell, survivor?" Margaret squeezed my hand. "Whoever you decide to be, you won't be alone." The drive home was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we turned onto my street, I noticed something that made me slam on the brakes. "What is it?" Margaret asked, alarmed. "The house," I whispered. "Look." Through the front windows, we could see lights moving inside, flashlights bobbing and weaving through the rooms. Someone was in my house. "Call Wilson," I instructed Margaret, already dialing 911 on my own phone. "Tell him to get back here now." Within minutes, police cars surrounded the house, officers with guns drawn approaching the front and back doors simultaneously. Margaret and I watched from across the street, her arm around my shoulders protectively. The officers entered and moments later emerged with two men in handcuffs, neither of whom I recognized. Detective Wilson approached us after the men had been put in patrol cars. "Not your son or daughter-in-law," he reported. "Professional burglars, from the look of their equipment. Strange timing, though." "Not strange at all," I said grimly. "I think I know exactly what they were looking for." Back inside, the house had been torn apart even more thoroughly than during the previous break-in. Paintings slashed, furniture upended, floorboards pried up in several rooms. They were looking for money, Wilson concluded after a preliminary inspection. Hidden cash, valuables. "Not just any money," I said, thinking of Daniel's journal. "Cartel money." Margaret and Wilson both stared at me. I explained about the journal, about Daniel Foster's criminal past, about his suspected ties to drug trafficking. "You think someone finally tracked him down?" Margaret asked. "After 15 years? Or tracked down what he took from them?" I suggested. "That would explain the timing. Robert dies, and suddenly people are tearing apart his house and business, looking for something." Wilson frowned. "If you're right, this could be dangerous. Cartels don't give up easily, especially when money is involved." "But how would they know?" Margaret wondered. "If he's been living as Robert Caldwell all this time, how would they suddenly connect him to Daniel Foster?" A cold realization washed over me. "Michael and Vanessa," I said. "They hired Reeves to investigate Robert. If Reeves was asking questions about Daniel Foster in Arizona, he might have inadvertently alerted the wrong people," Wilson finished. "I need to find your son and his wife immediately. They could be in danger too." He stepped away to make calls, leaving Margaret and me standing in the ruins of my living room. "You can't stay here," Margaret said firmly. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. I nodded, already knowing where I needed to go. The lake house. No one knows about it except Michael and Vanessa, and they have no reason to tell anyone now. Wilson returned, his expression grim. No answer at their apartment or cell phones. I've sent officers to check their place, but in the meantime, I strongly recommend you both go somewhere safe, somewhere not associated with either Robert Caldwell or Daniel Foster. We have a place, Margaret assured him. I'll stay with her. He gave us his direct number, promised to keep us updated, and arranged for a patrol car to follow us discreetly to ensure we weren't tailed. As we drove toward Lake Arrowhead, I felt a strange sense of coming full circle. Daniel Foster had created the lake house as my sanctuary, a place of safety if everything else fell apart. Now, barely a week after discovering its existence, I was fleeing to it for exactly the reasons he'd anticipated. Your husband was quite a man, Margaret observed as we wound through the dark mountain roads. Criminal past notwithstanding. He was, I agreed, finding comfort rather than pain in the thought. Whatever else he did, however it started, he loved me. That part was real. We reached the cottage near midnight, the lake of vast darkness beyond the windows, the house quiet and welcoming. The patrol officer who'd followed us did a quick check of the property, found nothing suspicious, and left with a promise to send someone by in the morning. Exhausted beyond words, we settled in for what remained of the night, Margaret taking the guest room while I lay in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. My husband of 15 years had been living under a stolen identity. My son had tried to blackmail me out of my inheritance. Professional burglars had torn apart my home. And somewhere, possibly, cartel members were looking for money Daniel Foster had taken from them 15 years ago. It seemed impossible that just 1 week earlier, my biggest concern had been adjusting to life as a widow. Morning brought sunlight streaming through the windows and the peaceful sound of birds on the lake. For a moment, waking in the unfamiliar bedroom, I could almost believe the events of the past week had been a nightmare. Then my phone rang, Detective Wilson's number on the screen. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said when I answered, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm afraid I have some news about your son and his wife." My heart seemed to stop. What happened? Their apartment was broken into last night, much like your house. Unlike your house, they were home at the time. Are they? I couldn't finish the question. They're alive, Wilson assured me quickly. But they've been injured. Michael has a concussion and some broken ribs. Vanessa is in more serious condition, internal bleeding, currently in surgery. I closed my eyes, relief and horror washing over me in equal measure.
Who did this?
The men we caught at your house aren't talking, but based on their tattoos and records, they have cartel connections. It seems your theory was correct. I need to go to the hospital, I said immediately. Which one are they in? Wilson gave me the information, adding, I'll have officers meet you there. Until we know exactly what's going on, everyone connected to Robert Caldwell or Daniel Foster needs protection. I thanked him and hung up, turning to find Margaret standing in the doorway, having heard my side of the conversation. Michael and Vanessa? She asked. I nodded, already reaching for my clothes. Attacked in their apartment. They're alive, but Vanessa's in surgery. I'm driving, Margaret said firmly. You're in no state. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of anxiety and guilt. Whatever Michael and Vanessa had done, whatever they had planned to do to me, I never wanted this.
They were still family.
He was still my son. At the hospital, uniformed officers stood outside a private room on the 3rd floor. They checked our IDs before letting us enter. Michael lay in the bed, his face bruised, a bandage around his head, his ribs wrapped tightly. He looked small somehow, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. Mom, he said when he saw me, his voice hoarse. You came? Of course I came, I said, moving to his bedside. You're my son. Tears filled his eyes, tears of pain, of fear, of shame. I'm sorry, he whispered, for everything. We never thought. We didn't know. Sure, I soothed, taking his hand carefully to avoid the four. Don't try to talk. Just rest. He shook his head weakly. No, you need to know. The men who came, they were looking for something. They kept asking about a key, about money. My blood ran cold. What key? What did you tell them? Nothing, he insisted. We didn't know what they were talking about. But they didn't believe us. They said they'd find you next. That you must know where it is. Where what is? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect. The money, Michael said. $5 million that Daniel Foster supposedly stole from them 15 years ago. They think he hid it somewhere only you would know to look. $5 million. The sum was staggering, almost incomprehensible. Had Daniel really stolen that much? Had he hidden it somewhere all these years? How is Vanessa? I asked, changing the subject as my mind raced. Michael's face crumpled. Still in surgery. They said she might lose the baby. Baby? I repeated, shocked. Vanessa is pregnant? He nodded, fresh tears spilling down his cheeks. 3 months. We were going to tell you before everything happened with Dad's will. It's why we were so desperate. The gambling debts, the loans, we were trying to get straight before the baby came. My hand went to my mouth. A grandchild. In the midst of all this chaos and betrayal, the news of new life hit me like a physical blow. Everything will be all right, I promised, though I had no right or reason to make such a claim. I'll fix this somehow. Detective Wilson appeared in the doorway, gesturing for me to join him in the hall. I squeezed Michael's hand and stepped outside. We've identified the men who broke into your house, Wilson said, without preamble. They work for Joaquin Morales, a mid-level cartel lieutenant who operates primarily in Arizona and California. And they're looking for money Daniel supposedly stole, I said. $5 million. Wilson nodded. Your son told you? Just now. But I don't know anything about any money. If Daniel hid it somewhere, he never told me. Maybe not directly, Wilson suggested. But he might have left clues, something only you would understand. I thought of the journal, the lake house, the hidden drawer in the desk. Daniel had spent 15 years preparing for a moment like this, protecting me from his past, from the consequences of his actions. The lake house, I said suddenly. It has to be there. That's why he created it, why he kept it secret from everyone. We should go back, Margaret urged. Search it properly. Wilson nodded. I'll send officers with you. But Mrs. Caldwell, if the money is there, it's evidence in a criminal investigation. And, technically, it belongs to the victims of Daniel Foster's crime. I don't care about the money, I said truthfully. I just want this to be over. I want my family safe. As if to underscore the urgency, a doctor appeared, heading for Michael's room with a serious expression. We followed her inside. Mr. Caldwell, she addressed Michael. Your wife is out of surgery. The internal bleeding has been controlled, but... She hesitated, glancing at me. This is my mother, Michael said. Please just tell us. The doctor nodded. I'm sorry, but we couldn't save the pregnancy. The trauma was too severe. Michael's face crumpled, a sound of raw pain escaping him. I moved to his side, holding him as he wept, for the child they'd lost, for the mess they'd created, for all of it. Over his shoulder, I met Wilson's eyes. Find that money, I mouthed silently. End this. He nodded once, understanding the stakes. If Daniel had hidden cartel money at the lake house, finding it was the only way to end the danger to my family. To all of us. Hours later, after Michael had fallen into an exhausted sleep and Vanessa had been moved to recovery, still unconscious from the surgery, Margaret and I prepared to return to the lake house with Wilson and 2 other officers. As we walked through the hospital parking garage, a sedan with tinted windows pulled up alongside us. The back window rolled down to reveal a man in his 60s, well-dressed, with silver hair and cold eyes. Mrs. Caldwell, he said in lightly accented English. My name is Joaquin Morales. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Wilson's hand moved to his gun, but the front windows of the sedan lowered to reveal men with weapons already drawn, pointed at us. Let's not make a scene in a public place, Morales suggested calmly. People might get hurt. Hospital staff, Patience, your son and his wife, perhaps. The threat was clear. I stepped forward, ignoring Margaret's attempt to pull me back. You're looking for the money Daniel Foster took from you, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. $5 million. Morales smiled thinly. Plus 15 years of interest. Daniel was always clever, but running was a mistake. If he had come to me, made arrangements to pay it back slowly, perhaps things would have ended differently for him. Heart failure ended things for him, I said coldly. Not you. A kindness he didn't deserve, Morales replied. But I'm not an unreasonable man, Mrs. Caldwell. I know you must love your son. I have children myself. Find my money, return it, and this ends. Your family will be safe. And if I don't know where it is? I challenged. His smile never wavered. Then I suggest you find it quickly. You have 48 hours. After that, I cannot guarantee the safety of anyone in your family. He handed me a card with a phone number. Call when you have it. The windows rolled up, and the car pulled away smoothly, leaving us standing frozen in the garage. That was incredibly dangerous, Wilson said, holstering his weapon. Never engage directly with someone like that. He was going to threaten my family regardless, I pointed out. At least now we know the timeline. 48 hours isn't much, Margaret said worriedly. It's enough, I replied, a strange calm settling over me. Daniel would have made sure of it. We drove to the lake house in tense silence, followed by Wilson's officers in a separate vehicle. The peaceful setting seemed surreal now, at odds with the life and death stakes we faced. Where do we start? Margaret asked as we entered the cottage. I moved directly to the bookshelf, where we'd found the box with a USB drive and letter. Daniel was methodical. If he had $5 million, he would have left me a way to find it. We searched the shelf thoroughly, pulling out books, checking behind and beneath it. Nothing. Hours passed as we examined every inch of the cottage, under floorboards, inside walls, beneath appliances. The officers brought in specialized equipment, metal detectors, a device that could detect hidden spaces behind walls. Still nothing. As night fell, I stood on the dock, staring out at the lake, exhaustion and desperation warring within me. The kayak bobbed gently in the water, still tied where we'd left it during our first visit. Check the dock. I bought you something you've always wanted. Daniel's postscript from his first letter suddenly echoed in my mind. I'd assumed he meant the kayak, the gift I'd always talked about wanting. But what if? I moved to the kayak, examining it with new purpose. It was beautiful, handcrafted from cedar with a clear finish that highlighted the wood grain. I ran my hands along its hull, searching for anything unusual. Near the stern, my fingers detected a slight irregularity in the wood, a seam that shouldn't be there. I called Wilson over. There's something inside the hull, I said, pointing to the barely perceptible line. With careful precision, Wilson used a pocket knife to pry open what turned out to be a small, expertly concealed hatch built into the kayak's hull. Inside was a waterproof container. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were bundles of cash, hundreds of them, along with a small note in Daniel's handwriting. Ellie, if you're reading this, then my past has finally caught up with us. I'm sorry for bringing this danger into your life. The money is all here, $5.2 million. Return it, and they should leave you in peace. Keep the house, keep our life together, keep the memories. Those are the only treasures that ever mattered to me. All my love, Daniel. Wilson whistled softly as he examined the cash. It's all here, after 15 years. He never spent it. I realized a lump forming in my throat. He stole all this money, ran for his life, assumed a new identity, and then never touched a dollar of it. He built a new life instead, Margaret said gently. A legitimate one with you. I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. The man I'd known as Robert, the man who was actually Daniel, had been many things, a thief, a liar, an imposter. But he had also been a loving husband, a good father to Michael, an honest businessman. He had transformed himself, or perhaps revealed his true self, in the years we'd spent together. Call Morales, I told Wilson, wiping my eyes. "Tell him we found his money." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of careful negotiations. Wilson, working with federal authorities who had a long-standing interest in Joaquin Morales, arranged for the exchange to take place under controlled conditions. In return for the full amount plus information about certain cartel operations Daniel had documented in files stored on the USB drive, Morales would sign a legally meaningless but symbolically important document agreeing to leave me and my family alone forever. "It's the best we can do," Wilson explained as we sat in a safe house provided by the FBI. "The federal authorities would prefer to arrest Morales, but they've been trying to build a case against him for years without success. This exchange at least gets the target off your back." "And my son, Vanessa?" I asked. "They'll be protected until this is resolved," he assured me. "After that." He hesitated. "They'll need to make some changes. New identities might be best, given their connection to all this." I nodded, understanding the implications. Even after the money was returned, Michael and Vanessa would never be completely safe using the Caldwell name, not with their faces known to Morales and his men. "They'll have to leave," I said softly. "Start over somewhere else." "Yes," Wilson agreed. "But that might be for the best anyway, given everything that's happened. For those who know what it's like to lose family twice, once to betrayal and once to circumstance, leave a comment. Some wounds heal clean. Others leave us permanently changed." The exchange was arranged for the following evening at an abandoned warehouse outside the city, neutral ground, with FBI agents concealed throughout the building. I insisted on being there, despite Wilson's objections. "This is my life," I told him firmly. "My husband's legacy, my son's future. I need to see it end." In the end, they agreed, though I was fitted with a bulletproof vest and given strict instructions to stay behind the agents at all times. Margaret came too, refusing to let me face this final chapter alone. "We started this journey together," she said simply. "We'll finish it together." The warehouse was cavernous, dimly lit, with dust motes dancing in the few shafts of light that penetrated the dirty windows. I stood beside an FBI agent named Collins, a serious woman with short dark hair and watchful eyes. Margaret was positioned near another exit with Wilson. At precisely 8 p.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up outside. Morales emerged from the middle vehicle, flanked by 2 men who were clearly armed despite the agreement that no weapons would be present. "Mrs. Caldwell," Morales greeted me as he approached, his voice echoing in the empty space. "I appreciate your cooperation. I just want this to be over," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled thinly. "As do I. 15 years is a long time to wait for what's mine." Agent Collins stepped forward with a metal briefcase. "The money is all here, $5.2 million as agreed. You can count it." One of Morales's men took the case, opening it to verify the contents. After a thorough inspection, he nodded to his boss. "Excellent," Morales said, then turned to me. "Daniel was fortunate to have found you, Mrs. Caldwell. A loyal wife is worth more than any sum." "He wasn't just my husband," I said, unable to let his comment pass. "He was a good man, whatever he did before." Morales regarded me curiously. "People can change, it's true, but debts must still be paid." He handed me an envelope. The agreement signed as promised. "My organization will not trouble you or your family again." I took it, doubting the word of a cartel leader, but accepting that this symbolic gesture was the best security we could hope for. As Morales turned to leave, a commotion erupted at the far end of the warehouse. Shouts, the sound of breaking glass, and then gunfire, sharp and deafening in the enclosed space. "Down," Collins shouted, pushing me to the floor and covering me with her body. Everything happened, at once. More agents appeared from hiding places throughout the warehouse. Morales's men drew weapons. Bullets flew overhead as I pressed my face against the cold concrete, praying this wasn't all about to end in bloodshed. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," multiple voices commanded. When I dared to look up, I saw Morales being handcuffed, his expression one of cold fury rather than surprise. His men were face down on the ground, surrounded by agents with guns drawn.
Collins helped me to my feet.
"Are you hurt?" I shook my head, still trying to process what had happened. I thought the FBI wasn't going to arrest him.
"Plans changed," she said simply.
"We received new intelligence that made taking him into custody the priority." Across the warehouse, I saw Margaret being escorted to safety by Wilson. She looked shaken but unharmed. As I watched Morales being led away, his eyes met mine one last time. "This changes nothing," he called out. "The agreement is void now. Remember that." A chill ran through me at his words, at the clear threat they contained. Before I could respond, he was gone, taken out to a waiting FBI vehicle. "Don't worry about his threats," Collins assured me, seeing my expression. "He'll be facing multiple federal charges, enough to keep him locked away for decades." "But his organization remains," I pointed out. "His people." She didn't deny it. "We'll talk about next steps for your protection once we're out of here." Those next steps, as outlined at FBI headquarters later that night, were dramatic. Witness protection for me, for Michael and Vanessa, new identities, new locations, new lives. Everything I had, the house, the shop, the lake cottage, would need to be sold or abandoned. "It's the only way to ensure your safety," the FBI supervisor explained. "Morales has a long reach, even from prison." I sat there, numb with shock. After everything I'd been through, losing Robert/Daniel, discovering his true identity, facing down my son's betrayal, now I was being asked to give up my entire identity as well. "How long?" I asked. "How long would we need to stay hidden?" The supervisor's expression was sympathetic but honest. "Indefinitely. Cartel memories are long. I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell, but your life as Eleanor Caldwell is over." I looked at Margaret, who had been allowed to stay with me during this discussion. Her eyes reflected my own despair. "Can I have some time?" I asked. "To think, to say goodbye to my home?" "A few days under protection," he agreed. "But the sooner you disappear, the safer you'll be." Back at the safe house where I would spend the night, Margaret and I sat in silence for a long time, processing the enormity of what lay ahead. "I could come with you," she said finally. "Go into the program too." I shook my head, touched by her offer but unwilling to accept such a sacrifice.
"No, Maggie."
"You have your life here, your family. I won't let this take that from you too. So what will you do?" I stared out the window at the unfamiliar street below, at the lives continuing as normal while mine had been shattered beyond recognition. "I don't know. I need to talk to Michael, see what he and Vanessa want to do." The next morning, under FBI escort, I visited Michael at the hospital. Vanessa had been moved to a regular room, recovering from her surgery, but still weak. They listened in shocked silence as I explained what had happened at the warehouse, what the FBI was proposing. "Witness protection?" Michael repeated, his voice hollow. "Leave everything behind? Forever?" "It's the only way to be safe," I said gently. "Morales won't forget, and his organization won't stop looking." Vanessa, pale against the hospital pillows, spoke up for the first time. "What about our lives? My family? Our friends? All gone," I said, the blunt truth kinder than false hope. "That's what witness protection means. New names, new histories, new places." Michael took Vanessa's hand, his expression grim. "After everything we did, all our plans, it ends like this." "It doesn't have to be an ending," I suggested, an idea forming as I spoke. "It could be a beginning, a chance to start fresh, without the debts, without the desperation that drove you to." I couldn't quite bring myself to finish the sentence. "To try to steal your inheritance," Michael completed quietly. "To betray our own mother." "Yes," I acknowledged. "All of that can be left behind, too." Vanessa began to cry softly, the reality of their situation finally hitting home. "We lost everything," she whispered. "The baby, our home, our names. But you have each other," I reminded them. "And you have me, if you want me in your new life." Michael looked up, surprise evident in his face. "You'd still want us with you? After everything we did?" "You're my son," I said simply. Whatever else has happened, that hasn't changed. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of the Michael I remembered, the thoughtful, kind boy who had grown into a man I barely recognized. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "For all of it. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But you have it anyway. Family is family, even when it's broken." Over the next few days, as Michael and Vanessa recovered enough to be discharged from the hospital, we met with the FBI officials overseeing the Witness Protection Program. We would be given new identities, relocated to different states, provided with enough money to start over. Michael and Vanessa would go to Oregon. I would be sent to New Mexico. Different locations provide better security, the agent explained. Less chance of your new identities being connected to each other. But we'd still be able to communicate? I asked, unwilling to lose my son a second time. Through secure channels, yes, she assured me. Monitored, but private. With the decision made, I was granted 3 days to put my affairs in order, to say goodbye to the life I had built with Robert/Daniel over decades. Margaret drove me first to the house, where FBI agents kept watch outside. Walking through the rooms that had once been filled with love and memories, now partially destroyed by the cartel's search, I felt strangely detached. This was no longer my home. It had been tainted by violence, by betrayal, by the revelation that the man I had loved wasn't who I thought he was. I packed a small suitcase with a few items I couldn't bear to leave behind. Photographs, Robert's wedding ring, the journal I had found in the shop. Everything else would be sold, the proceeds deposited in accounts I would never access again. The shop was harder. Caldwell Antiques had been our life's work. The business we had built from nothing into a respected establishment. Each piece of furniture, each vintage item, held memories of the days we had spent finding it, restoring it, selling it to someone who would cherish it. "What happens to all this?" Margaret asked as we stood among the treasures that would soon belong to someone else. "The FBI will arrange for it to be sold," I explained. Quietly, without drawing attention. "It doesn't seem fair," she said, anger on my behalf evident in her voice. "You worked your whole life for this." I touched an antique mirror that Robert/Daniel had lovingly restored the year before his death. "Life isn't fair, Maggie." I learned that lesson thoroughly these past weeks. Last was the lake house, the secret sanctuary that had briefly represented hope and protection before becoming the hiding place for stolen millions. Unlike the house and shop, which felt contaminated by recent events, the cottage still held a sense of peace, of possibility. Standing on the dock, looking out over the water where the kayak had concealed Daniel's stolen fortune, I made a decision. "I'm not going to New Mexico," I announced to Margaret, who stood beside me. She turned to me in surprise. "What do you mean?" "The witness protection isn't for me," I finished. "I can't spend whatever years I have left looking over my shoulder, living a lie, separated from everything and everyone I care about." "Ellie, it's not safe." "Nothing is safe," I interrupted. "Nothing has ever been safe. Robert wasn't who I thought he was. My son betrayed me. My entire life was built on secrets and lies. But I survived all of it, Maggie. I'm stronger than I knew." "What are you going to do?" she asked, concern and a hint of admiration mingling in her expression. I looked back at the cottage, at the life Daniel had prepared for me without my knowledge. "I'm going to disappear, but on my terms. Not as someone in witness protection, just a woman starting over somewhere new." "The FBI won't like it," Margaret warned. "And Morales's people." "Morales's people are looking for Eleanor Caldwell," I pointed out. "The widow of the man who stole their money. But that woman is already gone. She disappeared the moment she learned her husband of 15 years was someone else entirely." Understanding dawned in Margaret's eyes. "You're going to use the identity crisis to your advantage." I nodded.
Exactly.
Eleanor Caldwell ceases to exist, not because the FBI erased her, but because she chooses to become someone new. Over the next 48 hours, with Margaret's help and without the FBI's knowledge, I put my plan into action. Using the skills she had developed as a detective, Margaret helped me create a new identity, not an official one backed by government documents, but one that would allow me to live quietly, under the radar. I withdrew cash from accounts that would soon be frozen, sold jewelry that had been gifts from Robert/Daniel, and packed only what I could carry in a single suitcase. The lake house keys I left with Margaret, along with a letter officially gifting the property to her. "I can't accept this," she protested. "You can and you will," I insisted. "Someone should enjoy it, and I trust you to keep its existence private." The night before I was scheduled to enter witness protection officially, I slipped away from the safe house while the FBI agent assigned to me was distracted by a call Margaret had arranged. By the time they realized I was gone, I was already on a bus heading east, a new name on my ticket, a new future ahead of me. I left letters for Michael and Vanessa to be delivered after they had entered the program. I explained my decision, promised to find a way to contact them eventually, and wished them well in their new life together. Despite everything, I hoped their fresh start would heal the wounds in their marriage, would give them a chance to become better versions of themselves. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of a small cottage on the coast of Maine, watching the waves crash against the rocky shore. The tourist season was ending, the small town quieting as summer visitors returned to their regular lives. My neighbors knew me as Helen Morrison, a widow who had moved from the Midwest after her husband's death, seeking solace in the ocean air. The antique shop I had opened in the town's main street was small but developing a loyal clientele. My years of experience with Robert, with Daniel, had taught me well, and my eye for beauty and value hadn't diminished with all that had happened. The phone in my pocket vibrated, a secure line, one of several Margaret had helped me set up to maintain contact without being traced. "Hello." I answered, knowing who it would be. "It's me." Margaret's voice came through, warm and familiar. "Just checking in. Are you well?" "Very well," I assured her. "The fall colors are starting here. You should see the contrast against the ocean. It's breathtaking." "I'd love to visit," she said, the same thing she said every time we spoke. And as always, I gently declined. "Not yet. It's still too soon." After we hung up, I remained on the porch, watching the sunset paint the water with gold and crimson. A letter had arrived that morning, forwarded through 3 different addresses before reaching me, untraceable to its origin. I opened it now, recognizing Michael's handwriting despite his attempts to disguise it. "Dear Mom, we're settled in our new place. I can't tell you where, of course, but there are mountains nearby and forests that remind me of camping trips when I was a kid. Vanessa has found work she enjoys, and I'm teaching again. Different subject, but same age group. The program handlers don't know I'm writing this. They'd be furious if they knew. But I needed to tell you that we're okay, that we're trying to build something honest this time. No shortcuts, no schemes. Just hard work and starting over. Vanessa is pregnant again. For months now, past the danger zone the doctors worried about after what happened. It's a girl. We're going to name her Eleanor, though of course officially she'll have our new last name. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that not a day passes when I don't regret what I did, how I treated you. You deserved better from your son. I hope wherever you are, you've found peace. I hope someday, when it's safe, we might see each other again. I'd like my daughter to know her grandmother, the strongest woman I've ever known. With love. Your son, no matter what name I'm using now." Tears blurred my vision as I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my sweater pocket, close to my heart. Some wounds heal clean, others leave us permanently changed. The past months had been both, healing in the distance from trauma, changing in the forced reconstruction of identity. As darkness fell over the ocean, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. Robert becoming Daniel, Daniel becoming Robert, Eleanor becoming Helen, layers of identity shifting like sand under waves. Who was I really beneath all the names and stories? I was a woman who had loved deeply, been betrayed terribly, and survived completely. I was a shopkeeper with an eye for beauty, a mother with an ache for reconciliation, a widow with memories both true and false. I was all of these things and more complex, more resilient, more knowing than I had ever imagined I could be. The cottage door opened behind me, and I turned to see Margaret stepping onto the porch, her familiar smile belying the surprise in her eyes. "You said not to visit," she reminded me, "but some invitations don't need to be spoken aloud." I stood and embraced her, this friend who had stood by me through the darkest days of my life. "I'm glad you came." "I brought news," she said as we moved inside, away from the evening chill. "Morales was killed in prison last month. Internal cartel conflict, apparently. The FBI believes the threat against you has diminished significantly." The information washed over me, relief mingled with a strange sense of anticlimax. After all the fear, all the running, to have it end so arbitrarily seemed almost disappointing. "So Eleanor Caldwell could safely reappear?" I asked, testing the idea aloud. Margaret studied me carefully. "Technically, yes. But the question is, do you want her to?" I looked around the cottage I had made mine, thought of the shop I was building, the quiet life I had carved out of chaos. "I don't know," I admitted. "Helen Morrison has a simplicity that Eleanor Caldwell lost long ago." "You don't have to decide tonight," Margaret said, squeezing my hand. "The wonderful thing about second chances is that they come with choices." Later, after Margaret had gone to sleep in the guest room, I stood on the porch again, listening to the rhythm of the waves, constant, eternal, untroubled by human concerns like identity and betrayal. In my hands, I held two photographs, one of Robert and me on our wedding day, young and blindingly happy, the other of Daniel Foster from his Arizona driver's license, a stranger who had become the love of my life. I had loved a man who wasn't real, yet our love itself had been real. I had raised a son who had betrayed me, yet he remained my son. I had built a life that had collapsed, yet here I stood, building another. Perhaps that was the truth beneath all the shifting identities, that love and betrayal, joy and pain, loss and discovery were all part of the same complex tapestry. That who we are is less about the names we use and more about the choices we make in the face of life's inevitable surprises. As the moon rose over the ocean, casting a silver path across the dark water, I made my decision. Tomorrow I would write to Michael, send the letter through the same circuitous route his had traveled to reach me. I would tell him about his sister's cottage in Maine, about the possibility of a meeting someday. Not soon, but someday, when his daughter was old enough to travel, when the scars of the past had faded enough for new connections to form. Eleanor, Helen, the name didn't matter. What mattered was that I had survived, that I had found strength I never knew I possessed, that I had learned the most important lesson of all, that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose who we become next. I tucked the photographs away and went inside, closing the door on the vast, moonlit ocean. Tomorrow would bring its own tides, its own revelations. For tonight, it was enough to know that I was here, whole and healing, writing my own story at last. 3 years later, on a bright summer day, I stood on that same porch, watching a car wind its way up the coastal road toward my cottage. My heart pounded with anticipation and a touch of fear. The woman I had become in Maine, part Eleanor, part Helen, wholly myself, was about to face the most profound reconciliation of all. The car parked, and 3 figures emerged: Michael, older and somehow gentler in his movements; Vanessa, her face softer than I remembered, and between them, holding each of their hands, a little girl with dark curls and curious eyes. "Grandma," she called out, her voice carrying on the salt breeze. "Is that you?" "Yes, sweetheart," I answered, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "That's me." As they walked up the path to my door, to my new life, I thought of Robert and Daniel, of secrets and revelations, of endings that become beginnings. The journey had been longer and stranger than I could ever have imagined, but standing here now, arms outstretched to embrace my granddaughter for the first time, I knew with absolute certainty. This was where the story had been heading all along.